I'm Kevin Pod, Senior Client Advisor with Quizlex, and this is our podcast series where we ask veteran GCs about various topics to help other GCs with similar issues. As for me, I was a lawyer for many years before I turned around 25 years ago now to working with corporate counsel and lawyers on their needs to run their companies and their legal practices, etc. Quizlex, the company I work for, is an alternative legal services provider who performs the work of outside counsel at the same, high quality, but at a fraction of the cost. Today, I'm joined by Brady Long, Executive VP and Chief Legal Counsel for TransOcean. He's been a GC for, shall we just say a little while to protect his age. Brady, you have much to offer the legal world with your insights, especially around the two main topics for today, legal leadership and financial performance of a GC's office. So first off, thank you very much for joining. A huge thank you for taking your time to prep and to join today. And let's start with legal leadership. Lawyers, as we both know, are trained in how to be a lawyer and do legal things, right? They're not trained in management of any kind. You've found, and many would agree, that GCs, as a group, could be better at the way they lead their own organizations. So the first question in this area is expand on why you think lawyers are not, very good at leadership, and what department within a company lawyers should take some of their learning cues from.
Right. Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on the podcast. I know it'll be a great conversation. Getting to your question, I can only speak from my experience, right? I don't have any empirical data for this, but I have a lot of anecdata, right? Lots of conversation with peers, fellow GCs who have observed this over the years. And so I can say in my experience that law firms and law school don't really train you necessarily. They're not really designed to train you for the GC role or for in-house legal practice generally. And again, that makes sense, right? I mean, their missions are totally different. And the resources are different. And the opportunity cost is different. Understandably, at a law firm, right, it's very clear every hour you spend doing non-billable items is, of course, a cost to the firm. And in the near term anyway, right, puts you at a disadvantage. So I completely understand why people come out of law firms maybe without being geared toward the leadership aspects of in-house practice. I've seen at my companies, I've now worked for 4 publicly traded companies, I've been GC of 3 of them, that this is something that most multinational corporations do pretty well. They have, human resources groups with leadership training, the concepts of 360s and executive coaching, those are all familiar. And so it's really a blessing for in-house lawyers to be able to avail themselves of those resources because, folks who went to business school and from all the different backgrounds we have at a company like TransOcean, they get it and they understand how important it is to focus on the things that we just didn't really focus on that much in law school and at law firms, which was, teamwork and formal training for ways to improve your ability to work within an organization.
That makes sense. Yeah. I don't recall the Socratic method being a great management training tool, right?
I mean, it's really good at what it's designed to do, right?
Right.
But it's interesting, right? Because, and again, it's been a few years since I've been in law school, right? 25, in fact. But we didn't have a single graded assignment that was featured any group dynamics. It was all individual merit, right? It was all about how well you can, figure out the issue and commit the analysis to writing. Business school got this right decades ago, where at least part of the grade is based on group dynamic and how well you can work in a team, right?
Yep.
And so, again, you get to a law firm and then you get particularly in-house and you realize, you can't succeed without other people succeeding around you.
Yep. I came up through management personally in a publicly traded company. I still remember my first 360. It was eye-opening, not in a terrible way, just like, oh, that's how it works, right? You understand. Yeah, and you got feedback from your peers and everyone else. So yeah, excellent answer. Next question in this area of legal leadership: have lawyers who come from law firms, excuse me. Have lawyers who come from law firms received excellent legal leadership training?
Well, I think again they can. Speaking from my experience, they can get it in their companies, depending on the situation, right? I think that multinationals get this right more often than not.
Right.
And I hope law firms are getting better at it. I think that they must see the positives that come out of it, right? I can't say that I'm seeing, though, that we're getting people from law firms who come in ready to take on leadership responsibilities. So,
Yeah.
and another way of looking at this, I suppose this is the framework for a lot of companies. You've got kind of a hierarchy, if you will, of roles, not in terms of their titles and their functions, but in terms of what they're going to be able to do for the company, right?
Right.
And so you've got high potential, high pots. You'll hear them referred to that way. And I know that this is, really unhelpful labeling in a lot of people's way of thinking. But I think that you have to be able to kind of divide, among employees. Okay, what is this person's highest and best use of the company going to be? And so you're going to have someone who will be a leader, someone who's on track to be a leader, someone who's already in that position. And then you have the individual contributor. And that's an interesting role, right? Because it's the one we were all kind of programmed for
Right.
in the law firm and in law school, frankly, to be an individual contributor. But I don't know many GCs who were individual contributors for very long, right? And again, there's no shame in being labeled as an individual contributor, except that you may be maxed out in that role at some point. It means you're a great technician. It means you're incredibly reliable. It means you're creative and aggressive, and you do the job you're assigned to do. But are you going to be given a team to work with? Or are you going to be given experience and opportunities with senior management, with the board? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself. If you're comfortable in that role, then great. And of course, we need a lot of individual contributors. And frankly, one of the things we're going to get to in a minute is, this department that I run at TransOcean is designed to accommodate people's expectations. And some people, they want to have the job of a technician, and we can certainly accommodate that. There are people who want more. They want something different, and we try to accommodate that as well.
Right.
But I think in summary, I think that when people come into a corporation, they see that there's a lot more to the practice of law that that they're just really kind of becoming initiated into.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. I remember the first time I heard the word HIPPL, high potential, low experience.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
I hadn't actually heard that one. That's an interesting one.
Yeah. I'm proud to say at some point in time, many years ago, I was labeled a HIPPL, and I was like,
Exactly.
oh,
Yeah.
well, that's great. High potential, low experience. Right. But that
Right.
was at a corporation. Right. And I don't recall those words
Yeah.
coming from law firms. So
Exactly. Right.
in terms of sort of mastery of the basics, right? Being really good at doing all the basic things, blocking and tackling, as football coaches would say, right? Can you explain how coaching and career planning, you were starting to get into this just now, can be improved, and how you've done that within corporate legal at many of your companies? I know this is something that's sort of near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, it really is. And I can't claim credit for having designed this. I just know over the years, picking up from what my peers in other departments do, I found it really helpful to have a semi-annual conversation with the folks who work for me, and to have them have that same conversation with the folks who work for them, cascaded through the organization, about just generally expectations, right? It's not just compensation, that's part of it. And we do this off cycle, so it's not part of the annual review or part of the decision about bonuses and raises and that kind of thing. This is standalone, outside of that cycle, where you sit down for an hour with the folks who work with you individually, and you just talk about their title, talk about their functions, talk about their outlook. What are they getting out of this experience working in my department? What they want to get out of it. And if not,
Right.
how can we bridge that gap? Those conversations can be uncomfortable, but they need to happen. If they don't happen, in that absence of direction and dialogue, people aren't happy. I mean, I don't know if it was ever the case, but the sense I got, starting at the law firm 25 years ago, was that it was very much kind of autocratic model, and I understand there needs to be some of that in every organization, but this is your job, and you do this, and we'll tell you when we're ready to give you something else, and eventually it happens, right, or it doesn't, and I don't know that that works with the demographic changes, right, changes of outlook, cultural changes. And I'm not just talking about in the U.S. Of course, we've got lawyers all over the world. And I've just observed people want a dialogue. They want to have some sort of, imagine that. They want to have some sort of say in their future, right? And they're not just happy to be there. I think, when I started the law firm, maybe this is just my limited perspective, but I was just happy to be there. I was thrilled to have a job, right? And now I think, people have so many options. And so that conversation is really important. And it's super important for them to see that you care. You've got to follow through to demonstrate that you care. It's more than just a conversation. But to the extent you have a disconnect, right? I think at that point, people just appreciate openness and honesty.
Yeah.
And so maybe you're not going to be ready for that promotion now, or maybe you want to move into this area of practice and that's already saturated with other lawyers. They're already loaded up on that. There's no daylight where we can kind of get you into that job or that position. But at least, it starts the dialogue going. And I found it really helpful because I've learned a lot in terms of how I can help people who work in my organization in ways I never would have anticipated.
Right. Just to tag onto that in my personal experience too, in management, a number of times, I've had those discussions with employees and they don't really know where they want to go. And it's the first time they've even asked themselves that question. And it's the beginning of that kind of internal discussion. Like you were saying, you were just happy to be employed and out of school, right? The first couple of years, I was happy to be employed, working, spending a lot of time working. And I wasn't thinking 5-7 years down the road. I wasn't thinking, do I want to be a manager? Do I want to lead people, right? You need someone to kind of say, there's more than your 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 or whatever it is that you're working. So
that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Exactly.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the benefits, of being a bit advanced, right, in my career, 25 years in. I can see kind of the big picture. I can see someone I saw in our ethics team a few years ago. And I said, you could do things outside of this group. And
That's
I think
fabulous.
You start thinking about doing those things. And, this professional, as terrific as she is, and as intelligent and focused as she is, she hadn't really thought about it that way.
Right.
Well, just a couple weeks ago, she got promoted into another department, a director level position, big pay raise. She has a team now working for her. And this is a conversation that was just kind of just kind of came spontaneously a few years ago.
Right.
And so I'm happy for her. She's happy for herself. She's happy for the company. The company's happy with the situation. We're better off because we had a vacancy in another department. We would have had to go outside and bring someone from the outside. We'd much rather keep somebody internally. And so, again, all around, it's beneficial.
Yeah, win-win. Lost track of how many in there. Yeah, so
exactly.
Right. Before we go on to the next topic of how to properly measure financial performance of a GC's office, any other gems or words of wisdom you want to share on this topic before we leave it?
Oh, the thing that has probably been front and center for me is just a reminder, when you've done a job like I've done for so many years, you sometimes forget what it's like to be in the org chart on that kind of bottom level, right? You're starting out from law school or from a firm, and just remember what it was like to be in that position, right? And have the uncertainties, have the anxieties about starting your career. And so when I think about it that way, I go out of my way to welcome people, make sure they feel included. And it seems to resonate. To me, I'm just a guy who walks down the hall and says hello to somebody. But somebody may really need to hear that from,
right.
Again, someone on the org chart that they see way at the top of the org chart. To me, they're a peer, they're a partner. But I realize that really matters. And, we have our department meetings. And fortunately, there are about 30 of us who join these meetings. And I'm able to recognize everybody when they enter the room, say, hey, Kyle, hey, Deborah, hey, Holly, etc. And little things like that, I hope that matters, because I want them to know they're part of this, that they're
Oh, it
not just
surely
part of the
does.
audience. Exactly.
Yes.
Well, I hope so, because
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean it. That's why they're in the meeting, right?
Right.
This
Right.
isn't
Yeah.
this. They're not just part of an audience, right? This is, now these are once a month, 1 hour meetings where we go over a lot of stuff that we want to communicate, and so it's not the typical like pizza room meeting, right, where you only have enough people in the meeting who could finish off 2 large pizzas. You've heard that phrase before. It's an interesting one. I think it came from Amazon. But anyway, no, there are different purposes of these meetings, but one of those is to make sure that everybody feels included and they can speak up and they have a voice. It doesn't matter where on the org chart they happen to be.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Next topic, financial performance, right? Over the course of your career, you've learned that, as GCs, lawyers, they can improve a bit how they discuss and measure the financial performance of their own legal department. So first question here, why should a GC even measure the financial performance of their office when we all know that you pay more for lawyers than the revenue that you bring in? So shouldn't lawyers just avoid that topic rather than debate finances with the CFO?
Well, I think you could, right? I just don't think you last very long, right? I think that's the way we really are measured, whether we think of it that way or not. We all are, I think, as we should be, very proud of what we do as legal professionals, but we have to fit into the context of a commercial enterprise, which means that every dollar that we consume needs to result in at least $1 of benefit to the company. I mean, well more than $1 of benefit for the company, right? Otherwise, this whole system collapses, right? Otherwise, you're vulnerable. And I've been in those positions of vulnerability where you're taken over, you've got an activist investor, and you start looking at costs a little bit differently when people come in from the outside, right? And you just don't want to be in that position. You want to have a clear case for every dollar you spend in your department, because number one, it provides you the security you need to make sure you're doing is right. And number two, it avoids those anxious conversations, budget season, where people say, well, why do you need all this headcount, or why do you need all this outside
Right.
counsel spend? Or, anyway, I've been through so many of these over the years, and so many GCs have. It is, we go to law school, we go in law firms, we're advocates. The most important advocacy job, I should say, there's no more important advocacy job than advocating for your function. Of course, you're going to bet the company lawsuits and deals and financings and everything else, but there's nothing more important than making sure that you're advocating for the people who are handling all of that stuff.
And it sounds like, Brady, not to put words in your mouth, although it's unexpressed, you're saying it needs to be a proactive. You don't wait for someone to come to talk to you about it, right? You didn't say that, but I think that's the gist of what you're saying.
Well, and I don't want to, right, a little bit of paranoia comes in handy sometimes, but no, I mean, they're going to, during budget season, people are going to show up with their own preconceived notions of what legal does. These are smart people. They're honest people. They care about the company. And often they have no clue what you do in legal. They have no idea.
Right.
They don't know how many lawsuits. They don't know how many contracts. They have no idea how many subsidiaries you have in your organization. And they wonder why you need a staff, in my case, of about 30 people. And outside counsel, we have about 80 law firms around the world who work for us. Why do you need all those lawyers and paralegals and other professionals, right? And to you, it's just obvious because you live it. You breathe it every day. Look at my inbox. I get 250 emails, unique emails a day on different topics, and everybody in my team is in a similar situation, right? And so I've always found that budget season, you go into it kind of dreading it initially, and then you realize, wait a second, this is a golden opportunity.
Prove your value.
People are actually, to prove your value with your work.
Absolutely.
And also, it's like the only time where you have an audience where you can actually sell your department, not just on the numbers, but on who you are and what you do. And, hopefully you're in a position where people don't think about legal all the time, good or bad, where you're just doing your job, you fit seamlessly in with the rest of the organization, your functions work seamlessly with you. But it's, depending on the format. I've been, again, GC of 3 different publicly traded companies, and every company does it different. Frankly, every CFO is done a little bit differently. But they actually are a captive audience for 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever. You get to talk about what you do. And they want to cut through, oh, no, I don't want to hear about all that. I want to hear about the numbers. Like, okay, hold on. Let me lay the foundation here. And then you'll understand the numbers, right? And so I see it as a great opportunity. I'm not a litigator. My training was as a corporate lawyer. But that's my one time a year, at least one time a year, where I get to kind of play the role of, a fearless trial advocate, right? Where I go in and I make my case.
Right. And during that budget season or other times in your career, you've been intensely scrutinized, right? I think you had pointed out that it helps you learn the financial language that a CFO uses to address ROI, right? Any tips on things like that? Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, you're right. So I was GC of Pride International. We got acquired by ENSCO. ENSCO had a long, proud tradition of, among many other things, strong emphasis on cost control. And now Pride did too, had a good emphasis on that as well, but it wasn't quite like ENSCO's. And so those first rounds of meetings, they put me through the ringer on every penny we spent. And so rather than resent it, rather than be anxious about it, I really learned, okay, that's the way this is going to be. And I'll tell you, that was hugely helpful for me to understand, you're right, the framework, the language, the terms. And so it's interesting because the more you're around the finance types, you realize they rely on modeling all the time. And the modeling is often highly speculative. And so I started to do some of my own modeling. For instance, how do you justify financially the value of one person in your ethics group? Just pick a random group, your government relations group, right? Make a case, build a model. Okay, this person in ethics costs X, and they're mitigating risk that is X times 3 or whatever. And you can debate, probability and the severity of that risk actually coming to fruition and so on. But you make a case for it, and you start, speaking their language, and they start understanding, okay, I get it. That employee in that role is helping us avoid 3x legal risk.
Right.
And there's at least a 50% chance of that happening if we took that person out of the function. And there's a 100% chance of it costing a lot more if we try to outsource it. Generally speaking, outsourcing, again, your business model, I think, is beautiful. And so I'll absolutely endorse that because you guys can do it at a very efficient rate. However, generally speaking, when you have to go outside, it's going to cost a lot more.
Right.
And so that's the conversation you have. It's being open-minded and realizing your job is more than just making sure the lawsuits are won and the contracts are solid. It's about making a case to finance, accounting, and other departments for your team.
Right, and you just touched on inside expenses, internal expenses versus external. It was going to be my next question, so I'll just kind of expand on your answer. Right, should internal expenses, cost of GCs, the unit, benefits, et cetera, be looked at the same as the external costs, whether you're hiring outside counsel, an alternative legal service provider, experts, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer is it's a little bit complicated because on one hand, it shouldn't matter at all, right? When
dollar's a dollar, right?
When you're a company like Pride, exactly, yeah. When you're Pride International, and among other things, your competitors look at you and think about you as an acquisition target. They look at G&A, right, or SG&A, depending on the company, right? And they look at that number and they say, wow, to them, maybe they think that's high, right? We can squeeze a lot of efficiencies into that company by acquiring them and cutting a lot of that cost, right? So on one hand, it doesn't matter whether it's in-house or outside. But I think we all know that there are pros and cons of both. Of course, you have the flexibility of outside counsel. I love it. You call a firm, you've got a deal that needs to be done in 2 weeks. They can staff that deal up. It'll be at a premium, but they'll staff it up and they'll do a good job. You could never do that in-house. At the same time, you've got a function like we do, these heavily repeated functions like our service contracts, our drilling contracts, and our vendor contracts. If we were to outsource that, it'd be incredibly inefficient. And also, we'd have to spend probably a few weeks training outside counsel on these things, because generally people don't call outside counsel for this stuff. Why? Because they do it in-house, right? And we've got terrific lawyers. I'd put them up there with the best commercial lawyers in the world. But their niche is drilling contracts. And so, yeah, a dollar spent there is more valuable than it would be spent outside the company. So it depends on the situation. But, my view is, you're going to spend between 40 and 60% of your budget with inside resources. And that's going to vary over the years depending on a number of factors.
Okay.
But the ratio, as I've talked to other GCs, is, it kind of approximates toward 50-50 over time.
Well, that's interesting. I've actually never heard that.
Yeah, and again, is that the right answer? I don't know. Maybe it's energy specific because I'm a prisoner of my experience here in the energy industry. But that's generally the way. I mean, if you could try to go one way or the other, and you just always bump up against the usual considerations, right?
Gotcha.
Bandwidth issues, expertise, and so on.
After I was a lawyer, I've gone to consulting, and a lot of it consulting is sales, right? It's consulting that turns to sales, and the revenue for a company is often claimed by sales as the ROI, right? Like we sold 50 million this year, we only cost 3 million. We have a $47 million ROI. What do you have in legal, right? So what do you do when what do you do when sales claims your revenue stream?
Yeah, well, okay. First of all, I say you're right. I applaud you. Thank you for the good work you do. Because, I mean, it isn't a zero-sum game, but budget season it is, right? And so, first of all, you're part of that long record of success, right? There's nothing we do in this company that doesn't benefit from the role of legal. We run 36 offshore rigs around the world, highly complicated. We'll call them pieces of equipment. It's tens of thousands of pieces of equipment, understandably,
really
right?
big pieces,
These are massive pieces of equipment, right?
Right.
And they're working around the world. And no, we don't have any lawyers or paralegals or other professionals on the rigs, but everything they do is, of course, supported by what we do. But coming back, though, don't mean to sidestep the question. They want to see numbers, right? They want to say, okay, well, the easiest way to do it is to point to your litigation successes. And of course, the easiest of the easy successes to point to are the cases you win. And so, in the 9 years I've been here, we've had over 40, I've lost track because we had a couple that recently settled, resolutions, that's judgments and settlements that have collectively earned this company, we'll call it EBITDA just to make it easier because this is all over the world, well over $600 million in EBITDA over 9 years. And so that's well in excess of our budget annually without getting into the specifics, right?
I should hope
so. I'm at least able to point to that and say, listen, we earn our keep here with just the lawsuits that we win, right? Or the settlements that we obtain. But just setting that aside, because, at some point, a lot of that's driven by, it's totally seasonal. I mean, you have a bunch of disputes with customers. You end up having to litigate it. You end up winning. Great. You have some IP disputes. Great. The patents expire. The customer disputes go away. And at the end of the day, the traditional role of in-house legal anyway, I think, is more of a defensive kind of nature, right? And then you get into, we are protecting this company every day from massive exposure. Take the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, antitrust issues, right? Export-import controls, right? The list of exposures is only growing. Cybersecurity risks now, right?
Right.
Securities fraud claims, exactly. I mean, you go on and on. The risks of AI, right? And we are protecting this company from, now here's the trick. So many of us in legal, we're great at the qualitative stuff. We're not as quantitatively minded, but come up with a model. I mean, I won't go into the details because, it's obviously private and confidential, but I can quantify in good faith the value of my ethics group, for instance. We're saving this company this kind of exposure every year. And so, we're not bringing in the big bucks, but we're certainly we're protecting our margins, and that's just as important.
Right. One of the things we talked about when we were preparing you and I for the podcast was a really interesting point to me. Right, you had said that knowing the financial impact has allowed you to retain and grow personnel that you have in place, and I
Yeah.
had never heard that. So I'd love to hear how, why. Yeah.
Well, and again, it's I think it's situational, and I know this is a sensitive topic, right? I, of course, applaud law firms who raise rates. Anybody who's going to improve their compensation situation, more power to them, and so on. And so, as my law firms know, these 80 firms, I'll pay reasonable rates for great service, and we'll give raises. We'll agree to the rate hikes every year. If there's bang for the buck, we'll do it. But what we've observed, particularly in oil and gas, where we've been in a downturn generally on and off for the last, we'll call it 10 years now, almost 10 years to the day, November of 2014, with the collapse of oil and gas and so on. So the point is, there's been a bit of an outpacing of outside counsel fees versus in-house counsel comp. And so we've tried to bridge that gap a little bit and pay our people internally better. We have more than tried. We've actually done that. But the case is easier to make now, Kevin, than it ever was in my situation for the make or buy analysis, right? We can make it in-house much more efficiently than we can buy it externally, right? Because those rates have gone up. Now, that's not always the case. But as a result of that, is a long-winded way of saying, as a result of that, I've made a case for bringing more work in-house. And so we did something a few years ago that traditionally companies of our size, of our market cap and footprint don't do. We don't generally hire straight out of law school. We know, the Exxons and BPs and Shells of the world do, or have historically. It's been a few years since I've looked at it. But anyway, we did that. We hired someone straight out of law school because that lawyer was working and partnering with outside counsel in a way that was displacing what we thought some inefficiencies in that relationship before, and everybody's better off. That means the law firm's doing more interesting work. This young lawyer is cutting his teeth on Form 4s, and SK checks on 10Qs and that kind of stuff. The kind of stuff he would have done at a law firm, but now he's in a corporation, which is where he wants to be anyway. And so again, all around, I think it works out. Fabulous. So that's the situation. We take advantage of that opportunity. I can't say it's always going to be that way, but certainly over the last few years, we've seen a growth in our in-house staff to displace a bit more of outside counsel costs.
Makes sense. You had mentioned, I forgot the woman's name, you said that went from ethics to a different department, kind of a promotion. Yeah. Do you offer career counseling to people within your unit that could actually lead them to get out of your unit?
Yeah, no, that is really important. I know other companies seem to do this really well. We've only had 2 folks leave our department in the last 9 years to take other jobs within the company. But yeah, we do, and that's part of this dialogue we have. That particular professional was an auditor by training, and so she's in a legal department or ethics department that, as I think most people observe, is generally dominated with folks with legal training. I think she realized that she probably didn't have the future in that group that she wanted. And so very early on, we realized, well, let's see if we can position you for something else. So yeah, some formal training and a lot of exposure and also some advocacy for me. When the vacancy arose, I became aware of it instantly because it was an executive level thing. And so I said, listen, you really need to think about putting this particular professional in that role. But no, there's so many options that the companies have access to. 360s, executive coaching. There's tons of seminars. We think of seminars in legal as CLEs, and that's
learning how to be a better lawyer, right?
Yeah, well, and in a lot of cases, checking the box.
Exactly.
To be honest, because anyway, that's a whole other story. But but no, this was very intentional, and I think that we have another employee who a few years ago was passed over for promotion, understandably, because she just didn't quite have the experience we needed, had maybe half the experience we needed. But she in that conversation identified that she would like to maybe get an MBA. And we looked at it and we priced it out. And she's committed to the company, right? This isn't just a free MBA that somebody gets, but we're paying for her MBA at the University of Texas at Austin. And so she does that, here and there as she can. She's loaded up to her eyeballs with work at work. And then she, on top of that, somehow manages to do the MBA work. But that's the kind of thing that I think you need to do to truly, really commit to people and get, I think, the most out of them and give the most to them.
That's a big 2A commitment. So yeah.
Well, that's it. And if she's willing to put in the work and continue to do a great job on the work she's doing, and she is, then why wouldn't we? Why
would you
wouldn't
have still done
we?
it if she wanted to be an Aggie versus a Longhorn? I'm just.
Well, that's the irony of it. She's an Aggie, by undergraduate credentials. But I know exactly. But she's terrific. The people
That's
I
why
have.
you should always prepare your questions ahead of time rather than make jokes like that, right?
But no, and the beauty of that is she has her law degree. She's terrific in the group she's working in. And she's going to come back. She's almost done. She'll be done, I guess, in maybe 9 months. She'll be eligible for all kinds of other things. And she may not avail herself
whole
of those
different career
opportunities.
track. Right?
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, we will benefit in legal as she'll benefit throughout her whole career having that MBA.
Brady, I applaud your commitment to managerial growth and the principles that you've espoused here on the call. I want to thank you for your time. Let me finish up with one long softball kind of a question, right? Give you one last chance to sort of cement some of your points home. Regardless of what we've already discussed about legal leadership, their financial performance, career counseling, is there any other challenge you successfully overcome in your career that you want to highlight to help other GCs, whether it's at a GC's office recently or years ago? Any victories you want to share, or what's working now that didn't work before, changed over time? Very, very amorphous last question. So,
yeah, sure. No, it's a great one. I would just say one of the best decisions I made early on at Pride International, I mentioned earlier, I was GC there. I'd only been GC there about a year, though I'd been in the department before that for 4 years, I guess, maybe 5 years before that. It's announced that we're getting acquired. I'm 18 months into the job as GC maybe at that point. Anytime an issue like that pops up in a company, right, whether it may be a reorganization or an acquisition or a merger of equals, whatever, it creates enormous anxiety for everybody, including executives. And you might say, well, yeah, you had your severance package and all that. Thanks to 280G, which is, a reference for the tax folks out there, I wasn't going to get much money out of that, really, because there's an excise tax, and the tax lawyers understand that. I didn't have 280G protection, fine. So I was not going to end up sailing off into the sunset. I would have just literally probably taken the first job that I got the next day, kind of a thing. But I walked into the room where we announced the deal with my team, my smallish team of maybe 15 people at the time. And I told them that I'm probably going to lose my job. I ended up not losing my job. I thought at that point I was going to lose my job. But my role here is to make sure all of you are the best positioned as you can be to keep your jobs. Because, you all are terrific. You all do great work. And the new company, the combined company, is going to need you. And that was just very much from the heart. That's the way I felt. And after that conversation, that statements that I made to people, it meant a lot to them. And I was able to put myself in their shoes because I was in their shoes.
Yeah.
And again, it's, the longer you do this, the more coarsened you are to it, the more calloused you get to it, right? And you think that everybody is kind of like, well, they'll figure it out like I would figure it out at age 52 if I had to go get another job. No, just remember, put yourself in their shoes. It's incredibly anxious. There are a number of reasons it's anxious for people. And so that's been kind of, for me, I've tried to keep that as a guiding principle. I'm sure I've failed on a number of occasions, but I've tried to use that as a guiding principle to just really understand where people are coming from and do your best to meet them where they are. Not just, this tough love, okay, well, they'll figure it out. No, really treat people with the utmost respect.
Yeah, well, great summation for a lawyer and a GC, but also kind of, certainly pertains to outside life as well, too. So thank you, Brady. Much appreciated. So,
of course. Thank you.
Thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure, very much.
Likewise.
So.
I've enjoyed it.
Um,
Thank you. Well done.
all right, thanks again.
Thank you.